Welcome to the Agility in Real Life podcast, Take 5 in Real Life. Now your hosts, Mike Studeman, Jeff Lee, and Pat Campbell.
Hi, and welcome back to the Take 5 IRL podcast. I'm Jeff Lee, a partner at Agility IRL and one of your hosts. And with me again today, I have Kelly Weyrauch from Agile Quality Systems. Hi, Kelly. How are you this morning?
I'm doing great, Jeff. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, so for anybody who's interested in this topic, we'll be talking about TIR45 today and recent changes to it. You may want, if you haven't already checked it out, we have a couple of previous episodes with Kelly that we've done around Agile in medical device and regulated environments. And today we're going to be getting into the Technical Information Report 45, which is about doing Agile in medical device and some changes to it. TIR45 was initially created in 2012, as Kelly, you very well remember, having been part of that effort, and just updated again here in 2023, and we'll be talking about changes. So Kelly, can you give us an overview, kind of what's different? Why was there a need for a change?
So the way Amy publishes technical information reports, much like the standards community, every 5 years they reassess their standards and guidances. And so they do one of several things. They might decide to eliminate the thing that's no longer necessary. They might decide to leave it as is. They might decide to make a major change, or they might escalate it to be an international standard. Now, in 2018, the decision was to leave it as is. So then 5 years after the original version had been published, they decided to just keep it as is with no changes. But in the following few years, there were some feedback from the community, people taking the classes that Amy offered, and other people from the software committee said there needs to be some updates, some additions. There have been some questions and some additional guidance that they were looking for. So in early 2020, they decided to make the update. So we got together again as a committee and made some changes that we'll summarize here, and eventually was published last year in 2023.
Excellent. All right. And so would you summarize this? Is this a significant change?
Yeah, it's not a major rewrite. It's some significant additions. And so I'll summarize some of those here with some of those additions where there was a few minor changes, but most of it was new content addressing new topics that people wanted us to address.
Excellent. So Kelly's going to be sharing some slides. So for those of you on podcast platforms that don't have a visual component, apologies. You can check this out on YouTube if you're interested in seeing the slides. But as we go through, we'll obviously talk to the content as well. So it should translate well from an audio point of view. So with that, Kelly, I'll let you walk us through it.
Okay, so a high-level summary of the changes, the way the document is organized. The original sections 1 and 2, were the introductory things, some foundational information. There were only some minor editorial changes there. In section 3 on definitions, there were a couple new definitions added to cover some new topics, but the rest were left unchanged, so not much change there. Section 4, the main change, this was the setting the foundations section that talked about the Agile Manifesto and the regulatory perspective and how you bring those together. The section was restructured to move some context into an appendix, some of the more detailed exploration of the Agile Manifesto, but most of the content remained unchanged. The biggest changes were in sections 5 and 6. So section 5 is the section that gets into some foundational concepts. Section 6 is more about specific practices. So let's talk about the changes to those sections. So in section 5, some of the main concept sections, 4 new topics were added with some takeaways to go with them. First was a relatively small section addressing how Agile and non-Agile teams can collaborate together. Some of the feedback that we got was many organizations using Agile were using Agile in a pocket of development, usually software, sometimes a little broader, but in a broader world that was still not using Agile methods. So this section gets into some planning recommendations of how to align teams that are on different development plan cadences.
That's great. And add me to the list of people who understand the value of that. I get asked all the time from people of how do you, regulated or not, how do you align Agile and non-Agile development teams?
Okay, the second section that was added was addressing the approvals and how evidence of approval has happened. And I want to tell a quick story here. In the new committee that was talking about this topic, I asked the question, does an approval require a signature? And there were 12 people in the room. 4 people raised their hands saying adamantly that yes, an approval must have a signature. 4 people were adamant that there is no such rule. That does not have to be the case. And 4 were somewhere in between, wondering, well, yeah, I think we've always done it that way, but I don't know why that's a rule. Well, it turns out that there is no rule that says an approval has to have a signature. Only certain kinds of approvals require a signature. So this new section talks about that. What kind of approvals need a signature? What other evidence can be used to indicate approval other than a signature? So this one gives some guidance, and we found this one in the classes to follow as an extremely important new topic, because many organizations are overly burdened by requiring signatures on every level of approval. And in the Agile model, approvals are happening all the time. And so this burden of adding signatures turns out to be unnecessary. So that's this section gives some guidance on.
Yeah, as you mentioned in the classes that we've done, the CARS class, certified Agile regulatory specialist, that's often a contentious topic of what requires a signature. So glad to see that that's been addressed.
Then the third section, there was a small one about Agile tools, talking about how they can be qualified. And the fourth one is gives some examples of objective evidence. One of the feedbacks we got was many organizations are used to objective evidence being a big document with a final approval signature. And Agile talks about creating evidence as you go. So this section gives guidance of different ways to provide evidence in an incremental way, evidence that exists in tools as opposed to big documents.
Thanks.
Then a large change in section 6. Originally, section 6 of the document was focused from the perspective of the IEC standard 62304, the software development standard, where it went through all of the sections of that standard and talked about how Agile addressed them. In this new version, we added a new section that comes out from the other perspective. It talks about Agile practices and gives some recommendations, guidance of how these practices can affect regulatory compliance topics. So a selected set of practices talk about how they address quality system principles and regulatory expectations and requirements. So for example, it talks about how the product backlog and backlog refinement and definition of ready is a design control element, because this is part of the design inputs activity that are control that design controls requires. So it talks about how backlog management has elements of design controls related to design inputs. Talks about the definition of done, which is related to the quality system control of design outputs. Definition of done clarifies what does done mean from a perspective of satisfying the quality system. We talk about some of the roles in the Agile model. The specific one I want to call out, drew a little bit of comment and criticism in the review cycle about the Scrum Master role, with the recommendation that the Scrum Master role, just as they guide the team on the application of Agile practices, they guide the team on the satisfaction of the quality system. In the Agile model, there's lots of it depends answers to how do we satisfy the quality system? What piece do we do here? How do we break things up? And that it depends is answered by a qualified team in the context that they're working. And so the recommendation here is the Scrum Master helps the team make those good decisions of how we're going to address our quality system as we go.
Very good. And one thing I'll note here, looking at the slides, and you counted on the product owner, Scrum Master. Is this rewrite more focused on Scrum specifically than Agile in general? Can you use, teams that are not using Scrum but are applying Agile concepts, how do they use this guidance?
It certainly uses some of the common Scrum terms. At the time the first edition was written, that was the dominant framework, so we adopted a lot of that language. But I think these concepts apply in any Agile framework. You might have different terms for them. I think all Agile models have some form of a product owner role. Agile models have some model of a Scrum Master or coach or guider of the team. So while these may be using some of the Scrum terms, I think many of the concepts apply to any Agile model. It's trying not to advocate specific to Scrum, but it certainly uses those terms. Okay, then another big addition in section 6 was another subsection talking about some additional topics beyond 62304. The original scope of TIR45, as mandated by the AMI committee, was to address elements of software development from the 62304 standard. But the feedback we got was most organizations that are using Agile for medical devices are not just software, so they wanted some guidance on some other activities around software development that 62304 doesn't address. So in the new section, we address these 4 elements. And you'll see when you get into the TIR that it's a common pattern within each of these 4 sections, that it talks about what are the controls that Agile brings, or the mechanisms that you can use the Agile framework to address these topics. So for design validation, for example, it talks about how we do incremental design validation and the 4 layers of the Agile model. At the product level, we address what's our fundamental strategy for how we do design validation. At the release level, we talk about the activities we do when we release a product to do design validation, such as final human factor studies or clinical evaluations. But beyond that, how you do validation incrementally. What can you do a story at a time? What can you do an increment at a time? One of the highlights of that section was addressing the regulation that says design validation has to be done on final product or their production equivalent. But that doesn't mean all validation has to be done at the end. It says some validation has to be done at the end on final versions of a product. So the TIR gets into how you can do incremental design validation as part of an overall validation strategy. And then applying that similar pattern for safety risk management, we talk about how you do risk management at a high level to address the foundational hazards of a given product, but that you develop your risk management activities as you go incrementally, how you can do incremental risk management, a story at a time, to say, how does this story impact risk management? Does it introduce a new hazardous scenario? Does it address a risk control measure? You do that a story at a time, and you aggregate some of these incrementally. And for final releases, you do your final summary documentation. Similar pattern for cybersecurity and usability, showing how we can do these activities incrementally in an Agile model.
Yeah, it sounds like to aggregate a little bit of what you've been saying, and so far some of the changes, really leaning in to that Agile mindset of incrementally getting to done, being very crisp and clear of what done means at various levels in your life cycle. And at the end, you've accomplished everything, but it doesn't mean that you wait to the end and then do everything. Is that a reasonable summary?
Yes, excellent example, that the incremental model addresses satisfying the quality system as you go. It isn't this big stepwise thing. It isn't leaving activities to the end. It's doing everything little bits at a time incrementally. And of course, the details of that depends on the context of your particular device and your quality system rules. But the concepts of doing it incrementally is what the TIR is trying to advocate for.
Excellent. Well, thanks for walking us through the updates to TIR45, and hopefully people who have been listening on this not only understand some of the differences, but also some of the key concepts that the TIR is trying to get across as far as really improving quality, improving your ability to create quality products while meeting regulations, in doing it in an Agile way.
Yeah, very good. I hope everybody can see the value that we've added of this new document addressing things going beyond simple software applications of Agile, because many medical organizations are using Agile for developing systems. And while the TIR is focused on software, the concept applies to systems development as well. So hope people are finding value in this new edition.
All right. Well, thanks, Kelly. And of course, if you're interested in reaching out to Kelly to learn more, Kelly at agilequalitysystems.com. Of course, you can reach out to me, Jeff, at agilityirl.com. And we'd be happy to talk through this with you and see how we can help your company, as well as put some comments in here. If you have questions we did not address in this episode, some questions, comments along with the podcast that we can answer in a public format will help others as well. So definitely appreciate people who engage in that way. All right. Well, thanks again, Kelly, for diving in with us today.
Thanks for organizing it, Jeff.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Take5IRL podcast. If you like it, please go ahead and share it with someone, as well as like and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. We are available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Also, leave us a comment or a suggestion for a future episode. Again, thanks for listening, and we look forward to you joining us next time on the Take5IRL podcast.